For nearly 4,000 years, the tallest man-made structure was the Great Pyramid of Giza, which stood at 146 metres. Today, it's the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which stands at 828 metres, nearly 8 times the pyramid at Giza. Can you imagine standing in the structure, looking out at the world 800 metres below? When we were in New Zealand a number of years ago, we had the chance to jump off Auckland's Sky Tower, which is only a meagre 328 metres high. Looking out before you jump, it was life-invigorating to say the least. The view is breathtaking, but so too is the drop. As you stand on the edge of the tower, you find that your breathing becomes shallow as your rational mind does the checklist to stage off the rising fear. Yep, I'm securely connected. It's going to be fine. Thousands of people do this every year. What's the big deal? No one's died from this. Have they? So many large towers. It seems like human nature to strive to build bigger and bigger things. Perhaps as a sense of achievement, a claim to fame, or even as a measure and reflection of power. In Genesis, we read about another tower, the Tower of Babel. Some legends describe that this tower was 3 times the size of the tallest structure that we have today. Most likely it was around 100 metres high, which was enormous in the ancient world at that time. Whatever its size, it was big, intimidating, and fear-inducing, and as the story goes, it was built to reach the heavens. We find the story of this tower in Genesis after the flood story. It seems that the hubris and pride of humanity was still an issue even after the flood. Our desire to make a name for ourselves, to be our own idol, was a driving force to build a tower larger than ever before to reach to the heavens. So who ordered the tower to be built? Whose idea was it? It was actually a guy called Nimrod. Now Nimrod was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, and Ham was the son of Noah. And he was described as a mighty warrior on earth, a mighty hunter. The name Nimrod actually means rebel. And the first centers of Nimrod's kingdom were in the land of Babylonia. Babylon itself was the center of Mesopotamia for 2,000 years, and from these nations people spread out over the whole earth. So we have a whole bunch of cities being built by Nimrod, who was a powerful, rebellious, violent warrior. He was in fact empire building. Now how did he do this? He was using military, technological, and economic might to overcome others. The Genesis account tells us that builders of the tower used bricks instead of stone and tar as mortar. Someone had invented bricks, which were much better than stones. Buildings were thus far bigger and more stable. Technological advancement can meet human need or fuel human greed. How has technological advancement and the lure for the latest and greatest fueled your capacity for greed? To want more, to be bigger, faster, to expand, to grow, are natural impulses of the modern world, it seems. But what was God's response to this tower? God disbands this endeavor, shuts down this empire building. People were scattered, unable to understand one another anymore, and confusion reigned. In fact, Babel actually means confusion. If you're like me, whenever I try to play God in my own life, confusion reigns. Whenever we construct monuments to ourselves, strive for worth and significance through the pursuit of more possessions and achievements, confusion reigns. Friends, we all have great capacity to create and invent things, to do things for the good of others and the world, or for the greed of self. Is our focus to meet human need or fuel human greed? Before this current situation that the world is in with COVID and the virus and the pandemic that's going on, the world was confronted with this thing in about 2007, 2009 called the global financial crisis. During this crisis, the country of Iceland actually became bankrupt almost. The country's wealth was lost, and it was lost largely due to the really poor decisions and behaviour of the bankers. Now, in the wake of this situation, the bankers were held accountable, which was really good, but they needed to restore their systems and their country. And a whole lot of other bankers were employed to do this. and women were in fact largely the bankers that were employed to help restore their systems. At this point in time, they changed their focus from a largely personal gain focus to one of collective responsibility and collective well-being. And these principles were enshrined even in terms of their legal systems. Collective responsibility and collective well-being. When we think of how greed can undermine even the righteous in our world, we think of a guy called King Solomon. Solomon was allegedly more wealthy, more wise, and more powerful than anyone who had ever lived. His fortune was estimated at being worth around $2.2 trillion by today's standard. This was actually perceived as a sign of blessing and favour from God. But we see that God's favour is less about what we have and more about what we give and use for the sake of others. When the Queen of Sheba, who is also very wise and wealthy, comes to visit Solomon, she sees the gardens, the palace, the servants, the food, the wealth, and she's impressed with his wisdom and his wealth. And she says to Solomon, "You have been blessed to maintain justice and righteousness. You have been blessed with wisdom and wealth." Why? To maintain justice and righteousness. But what does Solomon do with all these resources? He builds not so much a tower, but a temple with slave labour. He establishes military bases. He trades in weaponry, effectively becomes an arms dealer. He weds more women, increases taxes, and acquires more and more power and wealth and influence. He uses his wealth and power to dominate others and expand his kingdom at the expense of the poor and needy in his midst. He builds, in a sense, monuments unto himself. He got caught up in the very thing God had called him as the king of the Israelites to stand against. What was Solomon actually known for above all else? What quality was he renowned for? He was revered as a man of great wisdom. And yet the lure of mourners, the guile of greed, was greater than his wisdom. He becomes indifferent to the poor. He becomes the new Pharaoh in a sense. He becomes everything his ancestors and God despised. Friends, greed deafens us to the call of God and blinds us to the needs of others. The deception and seduction of more is powerful and it's everywhere. More land, more growth, more wealth, more power, more customers, more square footage, more money, more inches on my TV screen, more of anything and everything. Because more is better, right? More is not always better. More is not always good. Sometimes more is bad, destructive, wrong, and sometimes it's just evil. Moreness can expand our material world, all the while shrinking our hearts. Our kingdom can grow, but our relationships often shrivel. Moreness fixes our eyes on certain things and blinds us to what matters most. Friends, may we see that God's favour is less about what we have and more about what we give and use for the sake of others. What monuments to yourself are you building? Greed can only bring about confusion. Jesus, help me in my self-centeredness and self-indulgence. We are called not to build our own empires, but to see God's kingdom come, his will be done. Rather than building towers to heaven, Jesus, help us to kneel before your throne. Friends, may we heed the wisdom of Sheba and use our blessings and resources for justice and righteousness for others and not ourselves.